actually come to the, to the topic that we got. Tuvia, how you doing? Come, sit down here. How you doing? How's everything? Oh, pretty good, thank you. Sit down. Towards the end of the Megillah, the end of the 9th parak, so the pasuk says, Al Kein HaYehudim HaProzim HaYoshim Barai HaProzis, that those Jews who lived in the unfortified cities, the open cities, Osim Es Yom Abos Olachodesh Adar, just tell me it's open. Simcha Mishta V'Yom Tov, that they celebrate the 14th as a day of Simcha, Mishta, and Yom Tov. Umishloach Monas Ish L'Reya. Yankee, how you doing? Come sit down. Hi, Neil, come sit down. Right. So here, if you notice in the pasuk, there's no mention of any enactment, a takona. It says that the Yidden who lived in the Arei HaProzim, in the open cities, and I hope that we'll be able to. Baruch, hi, how are you? Bob, bring that chair over and let Baruch sit right next to you. Okay, Baruch sit next to Bob. Okay. Then, if anyone else comes, we'll bring chairs from the kitchen. Sit down, Baruch. So sit. There's no mention of the enactment of any takona. Okay, there's no mention, right? It merely says that they on their own they felt that the nisim and the experiences that they had been through warranted celebration, and they celebrated the following year. Simcha Mishta V'Yom Tov Mishloach Monas Ish L'Reyahu. Okay, and we'll see. I just, I'm very, very tempted to go into a more detailed explanation of the pasuk, but I know we'll never move beyond it. So I hope Mitzvah Shem, what we don't cover tonight, where I have a Mitzvah Shem Motzei Shabbos is a Malava Malka, after the Megillah, to which obviously everyone is invited, and we'll try to finish then. ויכתוב מרדכי הדברים האלה וישלח ספרים אל כל היהודים אשר בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש הקרוב והרוי חוקים. And now Mordechai wrote everything down, and he sent runners and he sent documents to all of those that lived in all parts of the empire. Call mommy. Okay, all of those that lived in all parts of the empire, those that live near and those that live far. L'kayim aleihem. Now he legislated, he enacted, right? L'kayim aleihem li'asosim es yom abba oso l'chodesh adar ve'es yom chamisha oso bo b'chol shana v'shana. And he legislated, he enacted that the 14th and the 15th of the month of Adar was to be a holiday celebrated every year. Kayomim asher nochu b'hem ha'yehudim mo'eveihem. Right? Just as the days that they rested, that they found relief, okay? והחודש אשר נפח להם ביוגן לשמחה מעבר ליום טוב, לעשות עשם ימי משתה ושמחה משלוח מונס איש לרעהו ומתונס לאביונים. This is how it was to be celebrated. I'm tempted to talk about why in the first pasuk it doesn't mention Matonas Lavyonim, in the second pasuk it does. That we will have an occasion to deal with that, but if we get into that again, we'll never even touch upon what I wish to discuss this evening. The next pasuk says, "V'kibel haYehudim es asher hechilo lasos v'es asher kosav Mordechai aleim." The Jews throughout the entire empire accepted. There were two things that they accepted. The acceptance here meant they continued the observance of this Yom Tov. Number one, they continued the observance that they had instituted of their own volition the first year. And number two, what extra enactments Mordechai had ruled, they accepted that as well. Okay, so that's really very much the origin. If one sees in the Gemara Megillah and Daf Zayin the dialogue between Esther and Mordechai and the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, where they debated the merits of establishing Purim as a Yom Tov, all of that is based on this pasuk, on these two psukim. But the bottom line is that at the end, of all this was they were mekabel to continue that which they did on their own, right? Number one. And although Mordechai's takona was a more demanding takona, it was an enactment that really created a Yom Tov, right? And again, for fear of digressing, I don't want, but remember that when Haman spoke to Achashverosh and he sought to convince him of the disloyalty of the Jewish people, he spoke. One of the things that he had that he pointed to was that they celebrate too many Yom Tovim. They waste too much time. Then they celebrate too much. And it says that there was a Baskel, and the Baskel said that you are finding fault with their Yom Tovim, that you're going to see that there's going to be another Yom Tov added to celebrate your downfall. Okay? So they were makabel everything. Right? Now, remember that at the beginning of the Masechtas Megillah, and I hope, again, I don't think that it'll be tonight, but we have to really, at some point, discuss how did it come to be that there's a Masechtas Megillah. After all, there's not a Masechta for Hanukkah, there's not a Masechta for Shavuos, for Pesach, and for Sukkot. There is, because the dinim are so extensive that they require their own Masechta, right? But really, the dinim of Purim could have, if you minus the Agadata, in this Masechta, if you eliminate the Agadata, then then we would see that really the dinim of Purim could really be included in another Masechta in a few blot, right? And so why was it exactly? And that's also part of the Kibbel HaYehudim. But we'll see exactly what the origin of the Masechta was. But anyway, the Masechta begins not with the Chiyuv of reading the Megillah as per se, but the Masechta begins by informing us that the Megillah can be read on Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet, and Tesvav, right? That there are 5 days which are kosher for the Kriyas HaMegillah, and the Mishnah goes on to explain that the 14th is the day that most communities read the Megillah, meaning that cities that are open, they're not walled cities. Walled cities from the time of Yoshua ben Nun read the Megillah on Tesvav, or that which we call Shushan Purim, which is a bit of a misnomer, because we actually, the Mishnah itself says that the criterion for this is the days of Yoshua ben Nun, not the time of Shushan. But anyway, that's also something that I hope we will discuss. And the Kfarim, the small towns, the small villages, really, they're not even towns. A Kfar is a village, were given a special dispensation whereby they were able to read the Megillah on the Monday or Thursday prior to Yud Daled, to enable them. Was it for their benefit? Was it to allow them to service the needs of the cities on Purim? Whatever it is, this is of course subject to different interpretations in the Gemara later on, but nevertheless they were given this dispensation, okay? And the Gemara talks about, the Gemara initially goes into a discussion of how could this be. You understand that in the Megillah we find no mention of this, we only find Yud Daled and we find Tesvav, right? And that was what Mordechai, and that was only because of the reality that the Yud Daled and Tesvav were celebrated at the time of the first year. Okay, and why Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, and Yud Gimel? So the Gemara learns from, there are 2 sources. One is Rabbi Omer Rav Shamin Bar Abba Omer Rabbi Yochanan Omakra Lakayim Es Yemei HaPurim Ha'ela Bizmanehem. That it says that they were mekabel to be mekayim Es Yemei HaPurim Ha'ela Bizmanehem. Zmanim Have Tiknu Lahem Chachamim. The Chachamim were mesakin many days, many times, right? Yeah. Okay, many times, right? Here, the different days from Yud Aleph through Tesvav. Okay, all right.
Oh, it's here.
Yeah. Then then the Gemara goes on, and the Gemara says that Rab Shimon, Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani learns from a different source, and he says that the pasuk says Kayom, which is the second pasuk, because the Zmanim Zmanehem is the pasuk which we learned about, which we read about first, that was prior to any legislation or enactment by Mordechai, and it says that they Bizmanehem. And then later on, it says that Vikibala Yehudim, that they were to observe Purim Kayomim Asher Noch B'hem Hayudim Ma'aveyim, the meaning that they accepted the enactment, the Takon of Mordechai. So Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani, who was a Talmud of Rab Yonasan, okay, Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani was very close to the Tanoim, because Rab Yonasan was one of the last of the Tanoim, but he was very elderly. The tradition is that he lived for many, many years, and although he was one of the later of the Tanoim, but he was still alive in the time of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Yonasan, really what he says, obviously we can't designate that the words of one Amora are more authoritative than the other, but definitely Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani is a very, very authoritative Amora, because whatever he says comes from Rabbi Yonasan, whose life spanned the career and the tenure of many, many of the Tanoim. Okay, fine. And he learns from, so Rabbi Yochanan learned from L'kaimes Purim Bizmanehem, Zmanem Habe, which means Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, right? And he learns from Kayomim. So the Gemara asks, why does Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani, why does he reject the first limud of Zmanehem? He says, Zmanim Zmayim lo mashma. He doesn't see the significance in that drasha. And why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan, meaning Rabbi Shimon bar Abba, who learns from Zman, why doesn't he want to learn from Kayomim? After all, Kayomim would be a more accurate limit in a way, because Kayomim really reflects more the takana of Mordechai after Mordechai's takana. So this seems that this would be a more accurate. So he says no. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan says Hahul Doros Hu Dichsiv. That Kayomim was only written to emphasize that Purim was accepted, and the Yidden throughout the entire empire were obligated themselves to be Makayim Purim. It doesn't tell us anything really of the details. So now, so the reason that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't want to learn from Kayomim is because he says that Kayomim really refers to something entirely different, because they could have said, remember, as the dialogue goes in the Gemara, there were those that rejected initially the institution of this Yom Tov because they felt that it is provocative. Right? That by celebrating such a Yom Tov, particularly in the way that we celebrate it, and then remember the ancillary that people eat and drink and sometimes say things and act in ways that are intemperate. So it was felt that this could generate anti-Semitism. That was a very, very significant concern. Okay, so that we understand. But why did Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, what fault did he find with the first drasha of Zmanehem? He says it doesn't, and whenever it says in the Gemara Lamashmalei, it means Rashi says lo soverlei. He doesn't agree with the logic behind it. He doesn't feel that it was. The Gemara doesn't say why. So now, if we can go for a moment. That Alti comes to town. We'll bring a chair from the kitchen. That we always try that this year should coincide with Zayin Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu's Yahrzeit. This year it didn't actually. We weren't able to actually have the learning on the date, remember that Moshe Rabbeinu figures very, very significantly into the Megillah, because we were talking the other day at Shalosh Shudas, Ish Yehudi Hoya B'Shushan Habira Melamed Sheshokol Bedora Kemoshe Bedora, right? That Mordechai and Moshe Rabbeinu, there were very, 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 very great similarities, and remember that Haman also was misled by the knowledge that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away in the month of Adar. He thought that would somehow propel, give success to his designs, and so and again also remember that I've mentioned in the sheet of the Yerushalmi, and the Ramban actually brings it lahalocha in his Hasogas on the Sefer HaMitzvot al Rambam, that the Ramban brings the Yerushalmi, and it says that the Megilas Esther was given to Moshe b'Sinai. That's it. And therefore he argues when the Rambam says that the mitzvahs asay medivrei sofrim, that the Kriyas HaMegillah, he argues and he says that it's Karav L'Daraisa, because he said that Moshe Rabbeinu was Makabel the Megillah Misinai. He was probably Makabel it as a part of the Torah Shebaal Peh, and then later in the days of Mordechai and Esther, there was a Gilui, and there was a limud that it should be written as a Megillah. But Al Kolponim, the Megillah was, according to Rabbi Yochanan, dated from that time. So Moshe Rabbeinu was inextricably bound up with the whole Inyan of Purim. So very, very, interesting. I'm going to share it with you because I tell you that it's the first time that I saw it. I never saw it before. This is what the Osameach, the Meshach Chochma that my children gave me for my 65th birthday, and was a Dvinsky Rav, and passed away, I think, in 1927. It was obviously the Gaon Olam, the Osameach, and the Rambam. And he explained that Lekayem es Yemei HaPurim Oila Bizmanehem. And that's what we learned. That was the posik that we learned, that voluntarily, Al Kein HaYehudim HaProzim HaYoshvim, they were Mekayem Yemei HaPurim Oila, right? It says that they accepted, and Mordechai wrote that they should Mekayem Yemei HaPurim Oila Bizmanehem, right? Whatever. And he points out something very, very interesting. That we know that in our tradition, for all matters pertaining to halacha, the Torah tells us, Vayi erev, vayi voker, yom echad, right? Yom sheni. That the yom is holach achar alayla, right? The yom is holach achar alayla. However, and this is, the Gemara says it very, very clearly, Ben Azai says it in the Chulin, in the parak of Osav Beno. So the Torah says that remember that if a calf is born, it can't be eaten, it can't be slaughtered for 7 days. And the 7 days are counted, it has to be night and day, night and day, night and day, because the Hayom is Holach Achar Alayla, right? However, this came about only later. At the time of the Masa Bereshis, right? At the time of the Masa Bereshis, the world was actually created. The creation of the Or was the first recorded, right? Vayomer Lakim Yehi Or. And the day preceded the night. Only later, Nitna Torah v'Nischad Shahalocha, that Vayi'era Vayivoke Yom Echad, that the Yom Rish, or Yom Echad, Yom Sheni, that for matters of our Torah, the Tayag mitzvahs and the mitzvahs derabanan, whatever, the yom is holach achar alayla. Okay, so now the way that it would seem would be this: if we were to say, for example, that the Yom is Holach Achar Alayla. Well, that it means that the Megillah is read Chayav Adam Likras as a Megillah Balayla L'Shanor Sebayom, right? If we were to say, however, that the Laila is Holach Achar Ayom, the way that it was prior to Vahiera Vayivoke, or prior to Matan Torah, the way that the Umas HaOlam count, then it would mean that the Megillah would be read in the daytime and the following night, right? That's the way it would be, because the Yom would precede the Laila. Okay. So now, when Haman, when his edict was sent to all corners of the empire, and they were told, Lios Hasidim Layom Hazeh, that they were told that on the 13th of Adar, the coming year, it's going to be a free-for-all, lahashmid, laharog, lahabed, right? So their understanding was that the Laila is Holach Acharayom, that it was the 13th, from the dawn of the morning of the 13th, and the following night. In other words, when the 13th and the following night, the dawn of the following morning already, so you had a 24-hour period in which you could engage in this, what we call this nefarious activity, right? This brutal, this slaughter, and the day went from the let's call it the Netzachama to the Netzachama of the following day, right? Okay. So therefore, when we wrote that, when the Megillah wrote that Lakayem es Yemei HaPurim Ha'ela Bizmanehem, right? The Bizmanehem implies Bizmanehem, the time, the days, as we count the days. That you shouldn't feel that because the Gezerah, you shouldn't interpret that because the Gezerah of Haman was on the 13th and the following night, that we should celebrate Purim from the morning to the following morning and read the Megillah, therefore, the morning and the following evening. No, L'kayim es yemei Purim hoyle bizmanehem, that they were Mekayim, through the Jews throughout the entire empire were Mekabel la es yemei Purim hoyle bizmanehem, the Zmanim, the way that they, right, numbered the days. Okay? That the Yom was Holach Achar Halayla. Okay? And, however, there were two provisions that were made, two stipulations, where there was an allowance made, where under certain circumstances we would use and we would relate Purim to the original Gezer of Haman, and where under certain circumstances the mitzvah of Purim could be the day and the following night, right? Okay? The day and the following night. Number one, Rashi says in Daf Yud Tes, Rashi says that, and the truth is the Ran says it as well, the beginning of the Masechta, that the Kfarim that were Makdim, Leyom HaKnisa, that the Kfarim that went, that they went back to the Thursday, right? And they would read the Megillah. Then when did they read the nighttime Megillah? Some said they didn't read it at all, they weren't able to. Some said that they read it as best they could in their communities. But Rashi has, in Daf Yud Tes, you can take a look, that Rashi has a circumstance whereby the Bnei Akfarim would read the Megillah in their kfar on the day of the Knisa, the market day, and at night they would go to the town and they would read the Megillah Shalayla the night after they read the morning Megillah. And that was what, how was that possible? That was possible because the original Gezer of Haman was the Laila Holech Achar Hayom, and although when they were Mekayim to the Yemei HaPurim Bizmanehem, according to the Zmanim of the Shulchan Aruch of Vayhi Yom Echad, right, the Yom Holach Achar Halayla, but there was a provision made to allow the Bnei Akforim under certain circumstances, so that they should not need to be mevatel the Megilas Shalayla, to allow them to read the Megilas Shalayla the night after. Okay, take a look there. Again, Belineda, if we'll have an opportunity, maybe we'll go into it more in detail, because it's a very, very lomdish sugya. This entire, the Masechta is a very lomdish Masechta. And then there's another. So that the Meir Simcha, that the Osamer doesn't bring, but it happens to be it's so, and it follows his idea. And then the other which he does bring is that when Purim is on Shabbos, according to our Luach, the Yudalit can never be Shabbos. But Chamisha also, Tesvov can be on Shabbos, right? When Tesvov is on Shabbos, when do you, so you read the Megillah on Friday. There's a machlokes in the Gemara, are you makdim the Megillah to Friday or to Thursday? It's the two mandomer. Our Mishnah says Friday, and the Baraisa says Thursday. Obviously, passing like the Mishnah. But the question is that the Mishnah makes no mention, or the Baraisa, when do we celebrate the Sudas Purim and Mishloach Monos, right? So the Yerushalmi says. So the Yerushalmi says that, and the Mogan Avram brings it in Tofresh Peites, the Yerushalmi says that the Sudas Purim under such circumstances cannot be held on Shabbos, because it's although it's not the traditional of Ein Ma'avin Simcha B'Simcha, but there's another reason, because it says Lasos Osam Yimei Mishta V'Simcha. And Lasos Osa means that Bezdin, that we create, and Lasos Osam can't mean Shabbos, because Shabbos is Mikveh Kviya V'Kaima. So since it says Lasos Osam, that's something which is Toli and Bezdin, it can't be, the Simchas Purim can't be on Shabbos. When do you make it? So the only time that you can do it is Motzei Shabbos, right? You do a Motzei Shabbos or Sunday, right? So Motzei Shabbos. So the question that the Mogan Avram asks then on the Yerushalmi, we learned that the Gemara said that why do you say that the Megillah is read Yud Aleph and Yud Beis if you know that either from Zmanehem or Kayomim you add 2 days? Why not add 17 and 18? Why 11 and 12? Rather 16 and 17, right? And that's why by many Chassidim we don't say Tachnun on 16 and 17, because the Salkadaitach of the Gemara was that should be, right? Okay. So the Gemara says because it says Lo Yavar. It says that they were Makayim, the Takona, but Velo Yavar. Right? So the meaning that it cannot, the Mikra Megillah cannot go beyond, the 15. All right? Not beyond that. So here, how can the Yerushalmi say that you make them the Sudas Purim Motzei Shabbos, which is already the 16th? That's the question. It's the Mogan Avram's question, right? All the Rishonim, and because of this, the Mari ben Leib, because of this, he said that the Bavli rejected the Yerushalmi, and he made the Sudas Purim in Yerushalayim. This is going back in the 16th century. He made the Sudas Purim on Shabbos, keneged the Yerushalmi. Okay. And the Mogan Avram and all of the Achronim were very, 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 they were very, very adamant that no, that you cannot do that we have to follow the Yerushalmi. But what about the question, the Lo Yava? It says Lo Yava. So this is what the Meir Simcha says. And he says that the Lo Yava, since the original Gezeira of Haman was, according to their Zmanim, that the Laila is Holech Acharayom. And although when we were Makabel Purim, we were Makabel Las Es Yemei Purim Ele Bizmanehem, the Yiddish Zmanim, okay? But Le'es Hatzarach, for certain circumstances, we allowed for the original concept of Laila Holech Acharayom, and therefore when Purim is Shabbos and it's not possible to make the Sudas Purim on Tesvav on Shabbos, you're allowed to make the Sudas Purim after Shabbos, although it's the Leil Tezayin, because the original Gezerah of Haman was with that understanding, and therefore, although we were Makabelas Yemei HaPurim Oela Bizmanehem, but it still retains, there was still a provision made for where it's necessary, where it's required, that we can still retain and observe that original intention of Haman and celebrate Purim. In other words, that the Lo Yava is not actually effective until the morning. And that's all because the Or Sameach says, and that's why the reason is because this was the original intention of Haman. And so therefore when the Chachamim instituted Purim, and they instituted its Bizmaneim, the Zmanim of the Torah, Vayi Erev and Vayi Voker, but there was still a provision and there were still allowances made that there are going to be certain circumstances I've given you to the Rashi and Daf Yutes, where the Bnei Kfarim had to read the Megilas Shalayla after the Megilas Shal Yom, and this circumstance where Tezvav is Shabbos, and although there's a Lo Yava, but the Lo Yava only begins the following morning, and the night for these purposes still belongs to Tesvav. Okay? Fine. Good. The Or Sameach, the Meshech Chochma goes on, and as that Haman, that Hipil Pur Hu HaGora Lefnei Haman, Miyom leyom umechodesh lechodesh lechodesh shnei chodesh adar. That Haman went to very, very great lengths. Obviously, that he was obviously very, very superstitious, and and everything was done. The Gorel was invested with a very, very almost a beyond natural capacity. The Gorel, and at the time of the Torah, remember that the Chalukas Haaretz was Al Pi Gorel, the Torah says, and the Gorel was Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, and Haman used, you understand, the Koach HaTumah, because one is going to ask that if, let's say, that on one hand, Yoshua ben Nun used the Gorel, and Eliezer HaKohen, the two of them used the Gorel to divide Eretz Yisrael with the Koach HaKedusha. So here, Haman is able to utilize the same Gorel with the Koach HaTumah. Right? But again, this is a discussion for another time. And again, just to maybe give you a little bit of an appetite, this has a lot to do with why we celebrate, why Yoshua ben Nun figures so prominently in the timing, the scheduling of the Mikra Megillah, because the Gorel connects Yoshua ben Nun and Haman. Okay? And here it's the ultimate in Kedusha, right? Because at the time of the Gorel, in the days of Yoshua ben Nun, Eretz Yisrael was invested with the ultimate of Kedusha. Like the Mishnah in the beginning of Midah says that there are 10 Kedushas. The ultimate is the Mokum of the Bein HaKruvim, right? Vayikra el Moshe, from when Rashi brings the pasuk that Moshe lo el moed, vayishmas hakol medaber elov me'oel moed me'ben shnei hakruvim. This was the ultimate. The first of the kedushas was the kedusha Eretz Yisrael, and then there was the kedusha of the Bate Arechoma, and then there was the kedusha of Yerushalayim. And before the kedusha of Yerushalayim, there was the kedusha of the Krochem Hamukafim Choima, and then the kedusha of, and so on and so on, until you come to the kedusha of the Mokum of the Bein Hashnei Hakruvim, from which the Kol emanated. That spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, Bein Shnei Hakruvim. Okay. So the Gorel invested Eretz Yisrael with those 10 kedushas, and here the same Gorel, it seems with Beruach HaKodesh, right, was min hakotzer lakotzer, right? Okay. Kevin shehigia la'adar, when it came to Samach Simcha Gedola, because he said that he saw that this is the Gorel came to the month that that Moshe Rabbeinu died. And that means that the month is a month of very, very poor prospects for them. Their fortune is very... Okay. And the Gemara says, but what didn't he know? He didn't know that Be'osa Yom, that Bezayin Ba'ada Meis Moshe, Bezayin Ba'ada Nolad Moshe. Right? He didn't know that. What's the question? Listen, everyone's time comes eventually, right? But the Torah says that the Misas Tzadikim es Mispa Yamecho Amalei. That the Tzadikim, that Moshe Rabbeinu, he was born on Zion Adar, he passed away on Zion Adar. Haman understood this because this was obviously was a rarity that a person should pass away on his birthday, and evidently where that did occur, it meant it said very, very great things about the person's character, his righteousness, his attainments, right? So Haman, listen what his cheshbon was. He said, if Moshe Rabbeinu, then this is the Samach Simcha Gedola. He came down to the wire. And again, I've spoken to you many exactly what the Gorel was. The Gorel, because there were two Gorelas. That's why we call it Purim, not Pur. Right? Because there were two Gorelas. There was a Gorel of 12 months, 12 Setlach, which there were 12, and then there was a Gorel of Shin Nun Daled, of 354 the days, you know, and the day had to match the way that it worked out was that when he pulled the Gorel of the month, it was Adar. When he pulled the Gorel of the numbers, it was Shin Mem 340, which was exactly that day of Yud Gimel Adar. Now, had he pulled out one Gorel and it said Adar, and he pulled out another Gorel and it said 100, it would have been very, very, it would have been a laughing stock. It would have been inaccurate because 100 would be in the summer sometime, right? 100 days from Nisan. But so Samach Simcha Gedola. However, he said one thing. He says that if it would be, he knew Moshe Rabbeinu, so it was V'samach Simcha Gedola. However, he thought to himself, and remember, Haman had advisors. Zeresh Ishta V'chol Chachamov. He had Yoatzim. Everything was discussed. Everything was, and they probably also, probably this matter was a matter, it was subject to a lot of discussion and sorcery and whatever. And Samach Simcha Gedola. So they came to this conclusion. If Moshe Rabbeinu passed away on the day of his birth, then it's a good siman for them. Because it means that Adarabba Moshe Rabbeinu, his madrege was so high, V'lokom Novi B'Yisrael Kemoshe, and although it says that B'umas HaOlam Kom, and that was Bilam, but remember also we've explained many times, it doesn't mean, the Chazal didn't mean to equate Bilam with Moshe Rabbeinu. In one prat, Bilam equaled Moshe Rabbeinu. We'll of course write that also. It's something for discussion. Okay, you keep a note of everything that I owe you.
Recording secretary.
Yeah. He's
recording secretary.
And Secretary of State. You do a better job, believe me. So, right. However, if Moshe Rabbeinu, even if he died and was born in Adar, but it was different days of the month, then it doesn't say anything about Moshe Rabbeinu's greatness, and it doesn't really indicate that Moshe Rabbeinu's chus would be Megan, right? Now, Samach Simcha Gedola, because he saw that Moshe Rabbeinu did not pass away on the same day that he was born, right? No. It can be because we make the cheshbon. Rashi in Megilas and in Kedushin makes the cheshbon. It's a poshut cheshbon that Moshe Rabbeinu was passed away on Zion Adar. That we know for certain because it was 3 days plus the conclusion of the Shloshim, and they crossed the Yarden on the 10th of Nisan. So that's obvious, okay. And the tradition is, that we have the Kabbalah from the Chazal that he was born. So how did Haman come to this? In other words, if we say that Haman was ignorant of his birth altogether, no, okay, Memela. But Haman knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was born during the month of Adar, right? Not as other Mefarshim say. He knew that he was born during the month of Adar. So why didn't you know that he was born on the same day? I mean, you knew already this, so why didn't you know that? The teretz is that, what does it mean, Akiba? What does it mean? Ar la ba'osa bod kinasachomets lar haneh.
And Erev Pesach, he would put chametz.
Yeah, so what does or mean?
Night.
Night, okay. Can it mean something else?
Fire.
What?
Fire.
Fire. So why does or mean night? Doesn't the Gemara, isn't that the first blot in the Gemara in Pesachim? If or means, because isn't there a mandama that says that it really meant in the morning of Arbosa, because it says or? Haboika or vanoshim shulchu. When did Yosef send his brothers al tirguzu badara? Haboika or vanoshim shulchu. Right? So why do we say or la bosa? So the conclusion of the Gemara is, yes, or taka means night. And then the Gedolei Rishonim and Achronim say that if the Mishnah meant night, and or could mean, but then why did the Mishnah have to be so unspecific, right? And what did we need the whole blot Gemara for? Say Lele, Yudalad, and make it very, very clear. So, if you remember, there's the Raavad in the beginning of Pesachim says that it comes to indicate that you should be boy that comes before Tzeis HaKechavim, still during the Ben Hashmoshes, when there are still rays of the sun visible. What the Ramban and many of the others don't agree with that, and they say no, there's mana b'dikas chametz is after Tzeis HaKechavim mamish. So why does it say or la bosa? It's poshut. Because the Mishnah says or la bosa boy kinas hachometz la or haner, right? So the or haner creates or. Then, so one might say that la or han, when the Mishnah says or la bosa boy kinas hachometz la or haner, you might say that the or haner is lavdavki. The Mishnah is telling you eitz tova. You understand? It's at night. You don't wish to use an or haner. Don't use an or haner, right? Then the Mishnah says or la bosa boy kinas hachometz. Then you must create the or. The nair is indispensable, right? It's an integral, right? It's an integral part of the b'dikas chametz. That's why the Mishnah says or, to tell me a time when you're boider chametz under such circumstances where you must have the or, because the or is essential. When is that? That it's at night, right? Another example, and the second example the Or Sameach brings. It says, remember that a person. The Torah says, "V'nasati negat saras bebeis eretz achuzaschem." That there was the negoyim, the negat saras. There was a nega nirali babayas, right? The Kohen comes and he says, "Empty everything out, because in the event that the house is tamei, I don't want everything to be empty out everything." And the Kohen comes and he says, "Yes, it's a nega, right? Kenega nirali." So it says, "Kenega nirali." V'lo ori. It says that the nega, for the Kohen to pronounce the nega tamei, the Kohen has to see it has to be visible with his naked eye. He should not have to light a candle. If it's at night, and from there we learn that the Kohen can't examine the bias at night, because at night he would have to light a candle or turn on a light. And therefore the Kohen only comes to check the house and check the nega in the daytime. And how do we learn this? Because it says, Kenega nira li, my naked eye, velola ori. Not where it's required that I light a candle or put on the light to be able to see what's doing in the walls. Okay? The two examples that are, right? Okay. And now, when the Torah says that Moshe Rabbeinu was born, and the mother, and the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu was with so much the ultimate of Mesiras Nefesh, right? Because what happened that after the Gezeirah of Paro, so Amram felt that he was forced, he had no choice but to separate from his wife, and then Miriam Hanaviyah, the little girl Miriam, said, Gezeiroschus kosher meshal Paro, you're worse than Paro, because Paro lo gozer el ala zacharim. And you, so anyway, and then Miriam said that Asidi imi sheteled bein, who's going to be mother Moshiach shel Yisrael, And the Gemara says, you remember the Gemara of Bava Basra, it says that Vayelach Ishme Beis Levi Vayikachas Bas Levi, it was Lekuchen Shniim, it was Machze Grushosa, and it said that Aaron and Miriam celebrated, and in any event, then the Gezer of Para came, and then, and it looked very, very bad for a time, and in the end, Vatamod Achaso Merochot Ledeya Mayeya. She wanted to see what the end result of Hanuvu was going to be, and it was, and as it worked out as she had prophesied. Okay? So what does the Gemara say? It says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was Vatera Oso Kitovu, right? Vatera Oso Kitovu. So what does Rashi say? Shenismale, the Gemara Sota, Shenismale Abayas Or, right? How did she know that it was Vatera Oso Kitovu? The Rabbani says, what mother says that her child isn't beautiful, isn't good, isn't the most beautiful? So Vatera Oso Kitov, what is the Torah telling us? Shenismala habayas are. And the Ramban says the Pshuta Shel Mikra is that she had Vatera Oso Kitov, she had inspiration that she should be Moshe Nefesh because she would be able to save him from Para's executioners. But the Gemara says that Vatera Oso Kitov Nismala habayas are. Right? This is the Gaonis. Listen to the Gaonis of the Osameach. Of the Meshach Chochma. So the Meshach Chochma says that Or means night. So if Moshe Rabbeinu was born on Zayin Adar, right, it means he was born on the night of Zayin Adar. Let's say Zayin Adar was let's say Sunday, okay? Let's say it was Sunday. So he was born, what's the Shabbos? And Nismal Abayas Or, because in the daytime, Shraga Betira Mahane, it doesn't serve any purpose, right? So Moshe Rabbeinu was born on Zayin Adar. When was he born? The night of Zayin Adar. When did he die? He died on Zayin Adar during the day. How do we know he died during the day? Because it says, Vayoyim Hashem el Moshe be'etzem hayoyim hazeh, alei, go up to the Har Nevo, and that the etzem hayoyim hazeh means, right? Etzem, right? It means chatzos, right? Means chatzos. So Mamela Moshe Rabbeinu was born the night of the 7th, and his histalkus was on the day of the 7th, right? Dr. Meir Simcha, Mamela Somach Simcha Gedola, because according to the Umas HaOlam, the Saturday night still belonged to the 6th. Understand? Because the Laila's Holach Achar Hayom, right? The Laila's Holach Achar Hayom. So Mamela Samach Simcha, because he saw that Kolzman, that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't, he knew either born or either died, it didn't mean anything to him. If he would have an indication that Moshe Rabbeinu was born on the same day that he as his yahrzeit, then he knew that he would know that Moshe Rabbeinu was as Mispa Yamecha Amale and Vayaki Lo Yochalo, and he knew that the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu would be Megan. But if Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't born on the same day, the yahrzeit and the birthday weren't on the same day, so it means everyone has to come one day and go one day. But what does it matter if it's 2 weeks apart or a few hours apart? But the fact is that if he was born the night of the 7th, which according to which we say must be because the Torah says Vatera Osa Kitov Vayar Lekim Es Haor Kitov Nismala Habayas Kula Or, so it means Moshe Rabbeinu was born the night following the 6th, which to Haman's Cheshbon was still the 6th. And Moshe Rabbeinu's Histalkus was when? It was Be'etzim Hayom Hazeh on the 7th. So according to Haman's Cheshbon, the Cheshbon of the Umas HaOlam, it was 2 separate days. The birthday was the 6th, and the yahrzeit was on the 7th. So Mamela is Kevin Shehigia La'ada, it's 2 separate days. It wasn't as Mitzpah Yamecha Amale. If so, he's no better than anyone else. What's the difference if the birthday is Tammuz and the yahrzeit is Cheshvan, or the birthday is Vov and the yahrzeit is Zayin? It's still not as Mitzpah Yamecha Amale, right? So Memela, the Haman found a very, very great sense of encouragement in this. that because he saw that Moshe Rabbeinu was not as mispa yamecha amale, and therefore the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu was lo male v'lo morid. Okay, and not only that, he said that everything goes. He says that hakol holech achar achisim, that the day of the yahrzeit is more significant than the day of birth, right? So Mamela he saw the samach simcha gedola. Okay, that's the way that the Osameach explains this. Okay, so I must tell you that many years I've been learning Megilas Esther, and after the Ashkoyach to the children, they brought me this the Osameach for my birthday. Without your prayer, I would have never seen this. Really, it's unbelievable, the goodness, isn't it? I mean, you understand what such a. It's not. Someone said it's a chap. It's not chap. It's always gecheshbon. You understand that the person sat and he worked and he thought and he contemplated the Medrashay Chazal and what each word means and why the Chazal used this word and not that word, and he came to the conclusion of Torah's emes hoise bepiu. Okay, fine. So now, come back to what we discussed before. We discussed before that the Mishnah says Megillah Nikreis Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, and Tesvav. Yud Daled and Tesvav, we know the Megillah is clear on that, because Mordechai wrote Vayichtav Mordechai, and the Kibbutz Beis Hashakosa Mordechai Aleim, and his enactment was Yud Daled and Tesvav. Yud Daled if you live here, Tesvav if you live there. Fine. Where do the Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, where does that come in? And obviously the Gemara is very clear that it could not, no one on his own initiative could say, you know what, we have to make things a little bit convenient for these poor people that live in how did Obama say, the folks, everyone is folks now, there's no people anymore, everyone is folks. These poor folks that live in the, in the rural communities, we got to do something for these folks. So, so let's, you couldn't do that, you understand, the conservative rabbis could do it, understand, but the Anshe Knesset Agdola couldn't do it, understand? So they had to find that Shemotza Mikra Meforash. They found the posuk, and Rabbi Yochanan said that the posuk on which they based this takona was Zmaneihem, right? And Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmani said that the posuk on which they based this takona was Kayomim. Okay, that Kayomim implies that Yud Daled and Tesvav we know. So Kayomim means that just as there's Yud Daled and Tesvav, so there's evidently there are another 2 days which are kosher for Kriyas HaMegillah, just as Yud Daled, and that must be Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. Why can't it be Yud Gimel? Because Yud Gimel is Man Kihila Lakolhi. Yud Gimel, we know that the Megillah, it's in the Megillah, it's recorded that they fasted and they prayed and as a matter of fact, the Yud Gimel's Man Kihila Lakolhi, right? We understand this Man Kihila Lakolhi either meaning Tanas Esther, or this was the day that they had that in most places they fought, and there are even some, I think that you pointed out that the Shiltas of Rabbi Choygon, and I think Rabbi Kiva here brings the Medrash Tanchuma that says that Yud Gimel in the Kfarim would read the Megillah Yud Gimel. But anyway, I don't want to. That's really a separate discussion. So anyway, so Kayomim tells us everything because Yud Daled and Tesvav we know, Yud Gimel we know because it's Man Kihila Lakolhi, and so the Kayomim has to tell us Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. Why not Tezayin? Because Lo Yavar. Okay, so everything is covered. So the Gemara says, why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan want to learn from Kayomim? So he says, because the Kayomim, he says that Kayomim doesn't tell us anything regarding this takana. It merely tells us that all of Klal Yisrael accepted the takana of Mordechai and Esther to observe the days of Purim. Maznayim is more specific. And Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani, he doesn't really give an objection. He just says he doesn't agree with the drosha of Zmanayim. La mashmalay. It doesn't occur, right? Okay. Why not? So according to the way, because the Zmanayim, understand? The Zmanayim, Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani didn't want to learn from Zmanayim because the Zmanayim isn't absolute. Because although the Zmanayim means that Mordechai and Esther were mesakin, that the Yontiv of Purim should follow our Zmanim and not their Zmanim, but he says that it's not absolute. It's not without caveat, an exception. Because there are certain circumstances. Number one, the Pnei Kfarim sometimes have circumstances where they have to read the Megillah the night following the morning. And sometimes the Arei Mukvas Chaima have to make the Sudas Purim the night of Tes Zion, which still is relying on the cheshbon of the Umas HaOlam that the Laila is Holach Achar Hayom. And then what does Zmanayim mean? Adarabah, Zmanayim means their Zmanim, not our Zmanim. In other words, so Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani didn't want to learn from Zmanayim because he says Zmanayim means their Zmanim. What does their Zmanim mean? It means, for the most part, it means the Zmanim of the Klal Yisrael. But under certain circumstances, Zmanayim can be their Zmanim. So therefore he didn't feel that the Zmanayim could be used for this, and he preferred to learn from Kayomim, which is, in his mind, is Chad Mashmai. It can only have one meaning. It's clear, right? Then, understand Akiva? Then, because the Zmanayim isn't an absolute drasha. On the one hand, we're saying that the Zmanayim means that notwithstanding that Haman's intention was that the Gezerah, that the Shechita should be the day and the following evening, but when they were Mekabel Purim, they were Mekabel Bizmaneim, the Zmanim of the Klal Yisrael, which is to begin celebrating Purim in the evening and continue during the daytime. But it's not always like that. There are some notable exceptions where the Zmaneim has to be viewed with a certain flexibility, and say that their Zmaneim means their Zmanim. Adarabah, the Laila Holach Achar Hayom. So Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, how can where it's so, the meaning of the Zmaneihem is so adjustable, it's so flexible, and it tells us so many different, how can we then take it and use it to tell us something as really as essential as what the Gemara wishes to know? The Gemara has a question: how could the Chachamim later abrogate, right, the takona of the Nevi'im of Yudalit and Tesvav and add Yudalef and Yud Beis? How could they do that? So Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, you're telling me Rabbi Yochanan from Zmanayim is a very, very vague drasha. It's the Pshuta Shal Mikra isn't even clear. Because Zmanayim can mean, for the most part, our Zmanim, but where need be, it's their Zmanim. So therefore he rejected that entirely. Therefore he said, therefore he had to learn from Kayomim. Because he said that Kayomim, in his mind, other than the objection that Rabbi Yochanan had that Kayomim refers more to the future, he didn't interpret it. But he said, but he said, you will agree with me. One thing that the meaning of the Kayomim is absolute. It's not subject to any discussion or question. That it's an absolute, and therefore I take it to mean Kayomim to add Yud Aleph and Yud Beis as Yud Aleph and Tezvav.
9:56.
Okay. Well, obviously we're not going to, but we believe that we will finish. I hope it's Lava Malka. The Mishnah said that Tesvav, the Kriyas HaMegillah on Tesvav, is for those cities that were Mukvas Chaim, right? What is the significance of the cities that are Mukvas Chaim? What exactly is their significance? So we will see, Belinada, we will see that there is a significance in security, right? Security. On the other hand, is it security or is it lack of security? The Ramban says that the Mukvas Chorma, that the walls provided security, okay, and it was always like that, that even in medieval Europe, even up until the time of the Industrial Revolution, it was always like this, that there was always a walled city, and there were villages and farms and peasants and serfs living around, and in times of danger, everyone would seek refuge in the city. And there was an agreement, there was an understanding, there was an arrangement that the villages and the farms would provide the material sustenance for the cities, and the cities would provide for their defense. Okay? That was always the arrangement. It had to be like that. However, the Ran says, but there was another issue here. The Ran asks on the Ramban that you could look at it differently as well. The walled cities perhaps were more dangerous because if they were exclusively Jewish cities, it's one thing, but they weren't. There were cities in Chutz La'aretz, right? So it means that there were Jews and non-Jews living together, and the walls locked them in. Understand? So the Ran says that where the Ramban says that the wall provided a measure of security from attack, the Ran says you could look at it differently and say that the wall facilitated violence against the Jews. So which is it? Our Gemara doesn't go into that, but it's going to be very, very relevant. Our Gemara, our Mishnah says that the walled cities are walled cities where there were walls from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. What exactly does it have to do with Yeshua ben Nun? Yeshua ben Nun preceded this by hundreds of years, right? What does it have to do with Yeshua ben Nun? We'll see in a moment. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, on Omid Beis, the Gemara brings a Beraisa, and the Gemara says that Masnisen the Lo Ki Haitana, that our Mishnah does not follow this Tana. Because this Tana says the Tanya Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer, Kerochen Hamukofen Chomes Memos Achashverosh Korem B'chamisha Osa. He says that the Krochim, the criterion for the Krochim to read the Megillah on Tesvav is not having been walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, because in his mind Yeshua ben Nun had nothing to do with this. It was long over. But it's those cities that were walled from the time of Achashverosh, those are like Shushan, and those read on Tesvav. And the Gemara talks about what they argue and do they argue, and the way that the Gemara leaves it is that there was a Gezerah Shava, which Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha does not agree with. He doesn't. Okay. Now we're going to see in a moment, what does it mean you don't agree with the Gezerah Shava? So I'm going to tell you the kasha, which I shared with you before. When we learned, Seth and I learned every Friday night, we were learning Megillah. And but I'm hoping that, although we wouldn't get to it this evening, I'm hoping Mitzvah Shabbat Malava Malka, I'm going to answer it in a way different than I answered it during our learning. But let me read to you a little bit here from the Aruch HaShulchan. See, Akiva, you're getting the whole library here, right? Making boy the chametz, all the svarim. Okay. Look what he says. Tanya b'kedushin. It says, this is a quote from the Tur Shulchan Aruch. It says, "V'lo soser es devarav." A person isn't permitted to contradict his father. V'lo machriya. And you can't be what does it mean? Perish Rashi, m'hayo aviv v'chacham echad cholkim b'davra alocha lo yoma nirin divrei ploni. Because that you shouldn't say your father is arguing with another Talmid Chacham, and you pipe up and you say, "Oh, Dad, he's right." Right. And the Tur asks on Rashi. He says, obviously, that's not what it means. That's obvious. You have to pipe up and you have to mix in and say, "Dad, not that he's right." He says, no, he says, you shouldn't even say, Dad, you're right. Understand? So then the Aruch HaShulchan, he brings the Shach. And the Shach says that it's in Siman Shin Mem, Reish Mem, that the Shach says the son isn't allowed to argue with the father. The Aruch HaShulchan asks all of the Gedolei Achronim, what do you mean? And he brings examples. That Reb Shimon Berebi, the son of Rabbeinu, argued with him. Mar Baravashi argued with his father. The Rambam in Hilchas Shchita argued with his father. The Tur, with the son of the Rosh, argued with his father. What do you mean you're not allowed to argue with your father? So the Aruch HaShulchan goes on to explain what the Achronim mean. The Achronim said that if you're speaking and learning, and you're speaking and you're trying to come to the conclusion of what the halacha is, so obviously, you understand, but just to say, you're wrong or you don't know what you're doing, that not. Then he goes into a discussion where the Shach says that this restriction applies even if the father is no longer living, and the Aruch HaShulchan says it doesn't. In any event, the principle here was enunciated that a son, without very, very compelling reason, doesn't argue with the father. Right? Doesn't argue. So based on that, you remember my question. So based on that, and I told you at that time that this was a question that I asked over the years, many Gedolim and Rosh Yeshiva, and no one. Some didn't want to give me the time of day even to, but many acknowledge that it's a very good point, but they didn't have an answer. I said that our Mishnah says that these mukafim, the krachim that were mukafim Chomim of Yeshua ben Nun, read the Megillah on Tesvav, right? Oh, because they were mukafim Chomim from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, right? Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says that the criterion isn't as Yeshua ben Nun, but rather Achashverosh, right? Fine. In the Gemara later on, the Gemara establishes that our Mishnah goes according to is Rabbi Akiva, but the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Akiva. Okay, that the Chachamim, according to the first lashon of the Gemara, the Chachamim disagreed with the whole takon of Yud Aleph and Yud Beis and Yud Gimel, and this was only Rabbi Akiva because he dashed Zmanayim. And according to the Ikad Amri in the Gemara, they say that at least Bizman Hazeh you can't do it. But Al Kolponim, this Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva, right? This Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva. So now, if you say that the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva, according to what the Gemara said, what the Amoraim said, so it means that Rabbi Akiva said Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet, Tesvav, and he also stipulated that the Krachim that were Mokafim Chamim Amos Yeshua ben Nun read on Tesvav. All this is Rabbi Akiva. Fine. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, the Gemara says that the Mishnah doesn't go according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha because Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha holds differently. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha holds that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha holds that the criterion isn't from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, but it's rather from the time of Achashverosh, right? Fine. Why? In what does Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and the Mishnah argue? In the Gezerah Shava of Prozi, which there are some that would said it wasn't a real Gezerah Shava, but most Rishonim say it was a true Gezerah Shava, complete Gezerah Shava, like any other Gezerah Shava of the Yud Gimel Midas. Okay? So now, how is a Gezerah Shava unique among the Yud Gimel Midas Shatar and Nidreshes B'hem? Because a Gezerah Shava, all of the other is a Kabbalah, because all of the other Yud Gimel Midas Shatar and Nidreshes B'hem, a person can learn his own Hekesh. He can certainly his own Kal V'Chomer, his own Klal U'Prata Klal, but a Gezerah Shava is only that which is Mekubal from Sinai, which Ein Adam Don Gezerah Shava Ma'atzmele Ke'en Kein Kibla Merabo, right? So the Gezerah Shava is a matter of Kabbalah. So it means the Mishnah had the Gezerah Shava of Prozi, which dates the standard of Mukvas Chaimer not from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha didn't have it. So it wasn't so much, it wasn't, at the way that the Gemara was understanding it here anyway, it wasn't totally so much in Svara, right? It was a question of the Gezerah Shava, right? Okay. Who was Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha?
Son of Rabbi Akiva.
Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the son of Rabbi Akiva. Right? Rashi in Shavuos and in Bechoros holds that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the son of Rabbi Akiva because Rabbi Akiva was the Kereach. Because Ben Azai says, Kol Chachmei Yisrael lefona keknipus hashum chutz min ha-kereach hazeh. Right? They called Rabbi Akiva was the Kereach. So Memele he says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the son of Rabbi Akiva. Right? All right? So now, what we learned that the son cannot be cholek on the father without without very, very good cause. So if the father holds a kal v'chomer and the son has a pirch on the kal v'chomer, it's a milsa detalya besvara. You hold it's a hekesh, he holds it's not a hekesh, but a gezerah shava is a kabbalah. And the father, it means that the Amoraim held that our Mishnah was Rabbi Akiva, not the Chachamim. So it means Rabbi Akiva was the one that held that the Mishnah, that Megillah was read on Chamisha Osa, in the Kfarim Amukfis Krachim, that are Mukafis Chomim Amos Yeshua ben Nun. Why? Because he learned the Gezerah Shava. So how did his son, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, come and agree, say, I don't hold the Gezerah Shava? And it's not a svara, understand? It's not a svara, understand? So where did he come and say that this is the Gezerah Shava that my father was Mekabel, and I hold? What do you mean? You what better source of a Gezerah Shava do you have than to be Mekabel from Rabbi Akiva, who was your father and your Rabbi? You know, what reason is there not to be Mekabel? So, you know, such a Gezerah Shava, right? What reason is there not to be Mekabel such a Gezerah Shava? Okay. So what at that time we talked about that maybe one would say that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, this was after Rabbi Akiva's lifetime, but it's not mashma like that because it's mashma from most Rishonim. You look at the Seder Hadoros which is an encyclopedia of the lives of all the Tanoim and Amoraim. You see that it's mistaber that Rabbi Akiva outlived his son Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So Rabbi Akiva lived very, very right. So okay. So I'll give you one very, very brief answer. Then we'll daven Ma'av, and I hope that you'll all join us from Lava Malka and Motzei Shabbos, and we'll be able to. The Gemara assumed here that the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva, because it says that Rabbi Akiva, it says that we dash in zmanehem, zmanim, and Rabbi Akiva, the Rabbi Akiva held that, the Chachamim didn't hold that. Okay, the second lashon of the Ikad Amri doesn't say that. The second lashon, the Ikad Amri in the Gemara doesn't say that. It says something else. It says that bizman hazeh, since bizman hazeh, for whatever it is, the takona of the kfarim being allowed to be makdim, the Kriyas HaMegillah doesn't apply. What's the reason? Perhaps the reason is because you may come to calculate from the day of the reading the Megillah to Pesach, and you'll be confused with Pesach. Perhaps it's because the Aniyim look towards the Mikra Megillah for the distribution of the Matanas Lavyonim, but Bisman. So in other words, everyone agrees that originally, because according to the first lashon of the Gemara, the Chachamim didn't agree with the whole drasha that you could ever read the Megillah early. According to the second lashon, everyone agrees you can read them, but they held that Bisman Hazeh, we don't utilize this takana. So in other words, the second lashon of the Gemara is telling us really that there's no machlokes in this. Everyone agrees with the takana, and everyone agrees that that bisman hazeh you don't read the Megillah only in Yudalad and Tesvav. right? For whatever reason it is, like a takona gezer, okay? So it comes like this. This Mishnah is now Divrei HaKol, right? There's only one, and Rabbeinu HaKodesh, when he edited the Mishnah and he began the Mesechus Megillah with this Mishnah, he began it with a Stam Mishnah. Because the halacha is always like a Stam Mishnah, there's no confusion in a Stam Mishnah, right? A Mishnah without machlokes. Dr. Yeshua ben Karcha, the emes is there is a slight machlokes. Because I hold, although you've now said according to the Ikeda Amrei that the Mishnah is Divrei HaKol, everyone agrees that Megillah is Nikreis on these 5 days, right, from the original Takona. But Bisman Hazeh, you don't do it, for whatever the reason might be. Everyone will agree with that, right? Everyone agrees with that, right? But there is one slight detail that there is some disagreement in the Mishnah. And that's on when the Mishnah says that the Megillah is Nikreis in Krochem Amukafim Chomim Amos Yeshua ben Nun on Tesvav, I would make an IE there, a comment, and say that it's not from Amos Yeshua ben Nun, but rather it's from the days of Achashverosh, right? And where do I get this from? Because I was makabel from my father that the Gezer Shav of Prozi does not apply. In other words, I wasn't makabel the Gezer Shav. What he's saying in the name of Rabbi Akiva. So now you're going to ask, why didn't the Mishnah say that Rabbi Akiva argues in this point? Because it couldn't be that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha argues with Rabbi Akiva that he holds the Gezer Shav and he doesn't hold it. It's father and son. So both of them hold when Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said that we measure from the days of Achashverosh, he was saying what he was makabel adarabah. I was never makabel the Gezer Shav of Prozi from my father, and he taught me that we measure from the days of Achashverosh rather than Yeshua ben Nun. Okay, but since there's agreement, since it's such an extensive, complicated Mishnah, and there's agreement on every point in the Mishnah other than this one, i.e., Rabbeinu HaKodesh preferred to leave it as a Stam Mishnah and didn't include this little detail. Understand? He didn't include it and left it for the Braisa. Understand? And another because according to the Ikeda Amrei, the essential of the Mishnah, there's no dispute. Everyone holds that Medivrei Hanaviyim, the Megillah is read on these 5 days, right? Okay, and everyone agrees that Bizman Hazeh, we don't implement the Takona either for the Tov of the Aniyim or because it will cause confusion as to the days of Pesach when you count 30 days from the Megillah, right? Okay, so it means that the Mishnah, which is a long Mishnah, a complicated Mishnah, is Divrei HaKol. There's only one slight disagreement, and that slight disagreement is: do we measure the Mukvas Choma from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, or do we measure from Memos HaChashverosh? Zokt Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, I'm a son of Rabbi Akiva, and as the other Chachamim were makabel the Gezer Shava Prozi, which dates it to Yeshua ben Nun, I wasn't, my father wasn't, right? And therefore, I'm writing this Baraisa just as a footnote to tell you that in this one issue we disagree. But you're going to ask, why so wasn't it recorded in the Mishnah? Because Rabbeinu HaKodesh, since the Mishnah was so complicated and complex, Rabbeinu HaKodesh preferred to leave it as a Stam Mishnah. Okay? And to leave this one area of Machlokas, which isn't Nageya Bizman Hazeh anyway, right? Which isn't Nageya Bizman Hazeh anyway, to leave it as a Stam Mishnah. Okay? Without Machlokas. So you might ask, but couldn't there be maybe some kind of a, because now Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha hold that the Krochim Mukvas Choma read on Tesvav only from the Achashverosh's time, and the rest of the Chachamim hold even from Yeshua ben Nun. So it comes out if there's a krach that's Memos Yeshua ben Nun, right, and they read the Megillah on Yud Daled, right? So whom do they follow? Right? So Do they go this way? Or do they go that way? If they go according to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, they'll read the Megillah, right? Since they'll read the Megillah on Yudalit, right? Because at the time of Achashverosh, it may have been there was no wall. If they go according to the Tanoim of the Mishnah, they'll read on Tesvav, right? So wouldn't that be? Isn't that kedai? No, because the Yerushalmi says that Eila ve'Eila b'vadai moedim that everyone is Yotze on Yudalit. So therefore Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says nothing can come because most of the Amoraim hold that Bisman Hazeh the Takona doesn't apply anyway. And even if you hold that the Takona does apply Bisman Hazeh and a krach that's Mukvas Chaimim Emos Yeshua ben Nun, that according to the Tanoim of the Mishnah you read on Tesvav, and according to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha you read on Yudalid, there could be some kind of no, because the Yerushalmi says that everyone is moide that all are Yotze on Yudalit. Okay, the Mirz Hashem, there are other answers also which are more the Derech Hagoda Hamoshchem Es Halev, and Mirz Hashem Motzei Shabbos and Purim will get to those. Okay, yeah.
What was the connection between the girl of the Chalukas Haaretz and the girl of?
I'll talk about it. It's a very very deep and broad topic. But I have a mahalach there. But you remind me, come Purim, I won't disappoint you. Okay. Someone said Rabbi Hananya ben Akasha Omer Rotza Kodesh Baruch Lezakas Yisrael Leficha Chibur Lem Torah Mitzvah Shadam Aradan Chafetz Lemantzivka Yagdil Torah VeYadil. Skadal.